Imagine walking into your own business, a place you've poured your heart and soul into, only to be met with hostility, accusations, and harassment. Now picture that this isn't just some random incident, this is a constant battle that you never expected to fight. For one black business owner, this nightmare is not just a one-off experience, it's been a persistent, shocking ordeal that no one should have to endure. But the truth behind these incidents is more twisted and alarming than anyone could have imagined. From the moment he opened his doors, he faced an uphill struggle. A struggle not just against the challenges of entrepreneurship, but against a culture of discrimination that lurked behind every corner. For years, he worked tirelessly to create a safe space, a welcoming environment where customers could trust the products and services offered. But no matter how much he tried to do things the right way, some individuals seemed determined to undermine his efforts. At first, it started small. Complaints, rumors, and subtle jabs, just enough to make him question if he was imagining it. It wasn't until the harassment escalated that he realized how deep the problem ran. Angry confrontations, false accusations, and even threats, he quickly found himself in a battle that was much larger than he could have ever anticipated. But what really shocked him was the people behind it. What seemed like random acts of hostility quickly began to reveal a more calculated and coordinated effort to tear down everything he'd worked for. As things spiraled out of control, the pressure mounted. The constant stress of fighting this battle was taking its toll. The situation seemed hopeless, and the feeling of being cornered was suffocating. But he refused to give up. He couldn't let the hate win. After all, this was more than just about his store, it was about showing the world that standing up to injustice, no matter how overwhelming it seems, is worth it. But the deeper he dug, the more shocking revelations began to surface. Secrets, betrayals, and a web of lies that seemed to stretch farther than he could ever have imagined. The truth was out there, but it wasn't what anyone expected. Was this just a random act of hatred, or was something far more sinister at play? As we begin to peel back the layers of this story, you'll discover the shocking details that no one saw coming. What exactly is going on behind the scenes? What lengths are people willing to go to destroy someone's dreams? And most importantly, who is responsible for this twisted campaign of harassment? Stay with us as we uncover the truth, piece by piece. Trust me, you won't believe what's coming next. The store had always been a dream come true. It wasn't just a business, it was a representation of everything he had worked for. Years of sacrifice, sleepless nights, and endless dedication went into making the place what it was today. He started with nothing but a small budget, a big vision, and an even bigger desire to create something that would make a difference. His mission was simple: offer quality products, foster a welcoming atmosphere, and contribute to the local community. At first, everything seemed to be going smoothly. Customers came in, they left with smiles, and the store slowly began to build a solid reputation. Word of mouth spread, and business flourished. He was proud of what he'd accomplished, and the people around him, including his employees, felt the same. He built a team that believed in the business, in him, and in the idea of creating something special in a world that often seemed indifferent to those trying to rise above. But that sense of pride would soon be tested. It started subtly. A few customers would complain about minor issues. At first, they seemed like nothing more than a part of running a business, normal hiccups that everyone dealt with. But the complaints began to grow, and soon they were no longer just about the products. They were about him. Rumors began to circulate about the owner's character, his business practices, and his intentions. These whispers weren't just idle gossip, they were purposeful, planted by someone with a clear agenda. The first few times he heard about it, he tried to dismiss it. After all, running a business comes with its share of criticism. But then it started to escalate. Customers, who once praised his work, started to behave differently. Some would come in and act strangely, staring at him or giving off a vibe that was almost hostile. One afternoon, A man came into the store and stood by the counter for what felt like an eternity, glaring at him. When he finally left, he muttered something under his breath, something that felt like an accusation. He didn't know what to make of it at the time, but the unease lingered. A week later, it happened again. Only this time, the interaction wasn't just unsettling, it was downright aggressive. A customer approached him, raising their voice over a small issue. At first, it seemed like just a misunderstanding. But the tone, the hostility behind the words, was unmistakable. This wasn't about a simple complaint anymore. This was personal. He tried to calm the situation down, to de-escalate, but it was clear this person wasn't interested in resolving anything. They wanted confrontation, and they seemed prepared to go as far as it took. That was the turning point. Something was wrong. This wasn't just about customer dissatisfaction, it was about something deeper, something more intentional. The tension built over the following months. Strange incidents began to pile up. Deliveries that were late, shipments that were misplaced, inventory that disappeared. Items went missing, and the staff started to feel like they were being watched. But the most disturbing part was the feeling that someone was deliberately targeting him. He started to wonder if it was just bad luck, or if something darker was at play. It wasn't until one afternoon, when a regular customer came in with a bizarre story, that the truth started to reveal itself. The customer, someone who had always been friendly, began telling him about a strange encounter they had witnessed a few days prior right outside his store. A group of individuals had been standing on the sidewalk, whispering and pointing at the building. The way they spoke about him was unnerving. They weren't just criticizing the business, they were plotting something. The business owner was shocked, confused, and scared. Who were these people? Why were they targeting him? Was this a personal vendetta or something bigger? He could feel the weight of the situation growing, pressing in on him from all sides. He wasn't sure how much longer he could hold on. As the harassment continued, the threats became more overt. Someone started to vandalize the store at night, leaving behind messages on the walls threatening words that felt chilling in their cold precision. The police were called, of course, but they were unable to find anything concrete. No one had witnessed anything, and there were no leads to follow. He felt like he was fighting a ghost, something he couldn't touch or understand. But the most frightening part was what came next. One evening, as he was closing the store, he saw something that made his blood run cold. A figure in the distance, standing just outside the window, watching him. When he approached, the figure disappeared into the shadows, leaving behind nothing but a sense of dread. He knew in that moment that this was no longer just harassment. This was intimidation. A calculated effort to drive him out. For a while, he considered giving up. The constant stress, the fear of what would happen next, it was all too much. But deep down, he couldn't walk away. This wasn't just his business, it was his livelihood, his identity. It was everything he had built. He couldn't let these faceless enemies win. But who were they? And what did they want? The mystery of the people behind the harassment continued to gnaw at him. He began to question every single interaction, every person who had come into his store. Were they all innocent customers, or was there someone close to him who was feeding information to those who wanted to see him fail? The more he thought about it, the more he realized that this wasn't just some random series of events. There was something organized about it, something calculated. This wasn't about simple revenge, this was about systematically breaking him down, step by step. He tried to dig deeper. He started talking to other business owners in the area, trying to find out if they had experienced anything similar. What he discovered was even more troubling. They, too, had been facing strange incidents, complaints, vandalism, and even threats. But no one had connected the dots. It was all happening under the surface, unnoticed by most. And yet there was a pattern. a pattern that seemed to link their troubles to something much bigger. It became clear to him that this was more than just an isolated case of harassment. This was part of something larger, a network of people who had been targeting local businesses, each one more vulnerable than the last. But who was behind it all? And why? The deeper he dug, the more questions he had, but the answers seemed to slip further away. It was as if the truth was always just out of reach, a shadow dancing on the edge of his vision. And just when he thought he was getting closer to the answers, something happened that would change everything. Late one night, as he was going through some old paperwork in his office, he found something that didn't belong. It was a letter, handwritten, with no return address. The words on the page were simple, but they sent a chill down his spine. You should have sold when you had the chance. The clock is ticking. It wasn't just a threat, it was a warning. And the realization hit him like a punch to the gut. Someone had been watching him, planning their next move all along. But who could it be? Someone who knew him. Someone close enough to strike without leaving a trace? With every passing day, the tension grew. The clock was ticking, and it seemed like his time was running out. But there was no way he was going to give up. Not now. Not when he was so close to uncovering the truth. But with every new lead, every twist in the story, the danger intensified. Who could he trust? And what would happen if he uncovered too much? As the story continues to unfold, the question remains, will he be able to hold on to everything he's built? Or will those determined to tear him down succeed in pushing him to the edge? The letter sat on his desk, its unsettling message still fresh in his mind. You should have sold when you had the chance. The clock is ticking. Every word seemed to echo in his head, amplifying his paranoia. Who could have sent it? How did they know he had been contemplating selling the store? The idea of selling had crossed his mind once or twice, but never seriously. The thought of walking away from everything he had worked for felt like a betrayal to himself, to his employees, to the community that had supported him. But now, with the threats growing and his sense of safety eroding, the idea was starting to feel more like a viable escape than a last resort. He sat back in his chair, staring at the letter, his mind racing through all the possible explanations. It wasn't just the threats that were wearing him down, it was the isolation. He had started this business with a sense of pride, and over the years, the community had become a part of that pride. But now, he couldn't help but wonder if that same community might be harboring the very people who were trying to tear him down. Could someone he knew, someone who seemed friendly and supportive, be the one behind it all? Or was it truly an outside force, a group with an agenda far beyond what he could comprehend? The more he thought about it, the more confused he became. Who could it be? It seemed like everyone had a motive, but no one had a clear answer. And every time he tried to investigate, it only made things worse. One of his employees, a young man who had always been dependable, had recently started acting strangely. He would disappear for long stretches of time, making excuses, and his demeanor had shifted from cheerful to distant. The business owner had brushed it off at first, thinking it was just stress or personal issues. But now, with everything else weighing on him, he couldn't shake the nagging feeling that his employee was hiding something. His instincts told him to confront the young man, to ask what was going on, but he hesitated. If this employee was involved in the harassment in any way, confronting him could be dangerous. What if the employee wasn't just a bystander, but an active participant in the campaign to destroy his business? What if the harassment had been coming from someone who was supposed to be loyal? The thought gnawed at him, making it even harder to trust anyone around him. But it wasn't just his employee causing concern. The ripple effect of the harassment had spread throughout the local business community. One by one, other business owners had started to report strange occurrences. Shopkeepers were receiving strange calls, deliveries were going missing, and others had reported anonymous threats, though none as explicit as the letter he had received. It was becoming clear that this wasn't just about his store anymore. There was something larger at play, something that seemed to target anyone who was trying to succeed in the area. Was this a conspiracy? A coordinated attack on small businesses by a larger force? Or was it simply a collection of random acts that had somehow come together to create the perfect storm? The fear and tension were starting to reach a boiling point. Every day felt like a ticking clock, each moment bringing him closer to a breaking point. He couldn't afford to ignore what was happening, but at the same time, he couldn't afford to act rashly. There were too many unknowns, too many risks involved in any move he might make. Every decision felt like it could either be the key to unlocking the truth or the final nail in the coffin for his business. One night, as he stayed late at the store, reviewing inventory and trying to get a grasp on the situation, he heard something outside. A noise soft, but deliberate. It was the sound of footsteps on the pavement, slow and measured. His heart skipped a beat as he quickly looked around the store. The lights were dimmed, and the back door was securely locked. He grabbed his phone and quietly moved toward the front window, peering out through the blinds. The figure he saw standing outside made his blood run cold. It was a man, dressed in dark clothing, standing just outside the reach of the street light. The figure wasn't moving, he was just standing there, staring at the store. There was something about his posture, something deliberate, that made it clear he wasn't just a passerby. He was waiting, watching. But for what? The longer he watched, the more unnerving it became. The man didn't appear to be in a rush, didn't seem concerned about being seen. He was just there, lingering in the shadows, making no attempt to hide. With a racing pulse, the business owner slowly backed away from the window, trying to avoid being noticed. Whoever this person was, he didn't want to confront him alone. Was this just another random act of intimidation, or was it a sign of something far more dangerous? What did this person know? How far were they willing to go to destroy everything he had worked for? The days blurred together as the harassment continued to mount. He couldn't shake the feeling that he was being followed, that there was someone watching his every move. He would catch glimpses of people lingering outside his store, staring as if they knew something he didn't. There were times when he would leave for the night, only to find small, strange markings on the sidewalk near his car, a mark that looked like a symbol, something he couldn't quite decipher, but felt deeply unsettling. His thoughts returned again to the letter. The ominous message and the clear sense of urgency it conveyed. It was like a puzzle, each word a clue, but none of the pieces seemed to fit. The clock was ticking. But ticking toward what? Was someone really planning to take him down? Or was the clock ticking towards something more? A dangerous revelation? A trap that was being set for him, one that he wasn't even aware of. He spent hours going through his files, his records, trying to connect any dots that might point him toward the person or group behind the campaign of terror. But no matter how hard he tried, there was always a piece missing. A person who didn't add up, a detail that didn't make sense. Everything seemed to slip through his fingers like sand. The harder he fought to hold on to the truth, the more it seemed to elude him. And then, as if to reinforce his feelings of isolation, one of his close friends, someone he had known for years, pulled him aside one evening after closing. With a serious expression, they whispered to him, "Be careful who you trust. People are talking. You don't know who's involved." The words struck him like a slap in the face, and for a moment, he wondered if his friend was trying to warn him about something even more dangerous than he had imagined. Was his friend in on it too? Had they been keeping secrets from him all along? Or was this a warning, a genuine attempt to help him see the truth before it was too late? The uncertainty was suffocating. Every interaction, every conversation, felt like a potential clue, but also a potential lie. Who could he trust anymore? Was there anyone left who didn't have some hidden agenda? The tension was unbearable. He was alone, with no one to turn to, and every decision seemed to bring him one step closer to the brink. The question remained, would he uncover the truth before it was too late, or would the forces working against him succeed in crushing everything he had fought so hard to build? The clock was still ticking. And as each day passed, the shadow of doubt grew larger. The days were starting to blend together in an unending cycle of fear and confusion. Every morning he would wake up, bracing himself for what the day might bring, knowing that the shadows around his business were growing darker. The constant threat, the feeling that someone was always watching him, had become a part of his daily life. It wasn't just about the store anymore, it was about his survival, his ability to hold on to everything he had worked so hard for. The business owner had started to notice more than just strange figures outside his store. One evening, as he locked up for the night, he found his car's windshield cracked, just a small crack, but a crack nonetheless. No note, no explanation. But it was enough to send his heart racing. That night, as he lay awake, the weight of everything crashing down on him, he heard a noise outside his window. It was faint, but distinct, a scratching sound, almost as if someone was dragging something heavy across the ground. His pulse quickened. Who could it be? What were they trying to do now? He mustered the courage to get up and peer through the blinds, but there was no one in sight. Only the darkness, stretched out across the empty street. Was it another warning? A sign that they were getting closer, that they weren't done yet? Or had he finally snapped, his mind unraveling from the constant stress and fear? He couldn't be sure anymore. Each new encounter, each new event, only seemed to raise more questions, more suspicions. And yet, the answers were always just out of reach. The tipping point came a few days later. He was at the store, closing up as usual, when his employee, the one he had been suspecting, asked to speak with him. There was something different about him that night. His usual demeanor was gone. The tension in his voice was palpable. "I need to tell you something," the employee said, looking over his shoulder as if to check for anyone listening. "What is it?" the business owner asked, his heart already beginning to race. I've been involved," the employee confessed, his words coming out in a rush. "Not in the way you think. But I didn't know what else to do. I didn't have a choice." The admission hit him like a punch to the gut. His mind whirled, trying to process what he was hearing. His own employee, the one he had trusted, had been involved in all of this. But in what way? And why hadn't he said anything sooner? "I didn't want to, but they said they would hurt my family. They know where they live. They know everything about me," the employee continued, his voice shaking. "I'm sorry. I didn't want to do it, but I had to." The business owner stood frozen, the weight of the confession sinking in. This wasn't just some isolated attack. This was coordinated, organized. There were people with power, people who could make threats like this real. He wasn't just dealing with petty criminals or jealous competitors, this was something much larger, much more sinister. The employee explained further, his voice barely above a whisper. "It's a group, okay? They've been targeting local businesses like yours for months. They want control over this area, and they'll stop at nothing to get it. They think that by destroying businesses like yours, they can push the owners out and take over. I didn't want to be part of it, but they had leverage." Everything was starting to come together, but the pieces were still scattered. Who was behind this group? What were their ultimate goals? Why had they chosen him, his store of all places? "I don't know who they are. I've only been dealing with one person, but they never gave me a name. I don't even know what they look like," the employee said, his face full of regret. "I'm just trying to survive. But you've got to get out, you've got to leave before it's too late." The words hung in the air, heavy and unsettling. Get out? Was that really his only option? To run, to leave behind everything he had worked for, everything he had built? But the business owner couldn't bring himself to do it. He wasn't a quitter. He wasn't going to let these faceless enemies win. He had come too far to walk away now. "I'm not leaving," he said, his voice firm, though the fear gnawed at him. "I'm going to fight." The employee nodded, his eyes wide with fear. "You don't understand. They won't stop until you're gone. They won't stop until they've taken everything." But the business owner had already made up his mind. This was no longer about surviving. It was about fighting back, about standing up to the forces that sought to destroy him. He couldn't just sit back and let them take his business, his life. He had to fight. The next few days were a blur of tension and uncertainty. The business owner knew he couldn't do it alone. He reached out to others, trusted allies, people he knew he could count on. He gathered his team, explained the situation as best as he could, and asked for their support. The weight of the situation was heavy on all of them, but the response was unanimous: they would stand by him. They would fight together, side by side. But even as they prepared for the battle ahead, the threats kept coming. More vandalism. More strange messages. More late-night visits from shadowy figures that seemed to appear out of nowhere. It was clear that the group wasn't just sitting idly by. They were watching, waiting, preparing for their next move. The business owner was on edge, knowing that at any moment, everything could come crashing down. The game had changed. This wasn't just about him anymore. This was about all of them, his employees, his community, his legacy. He couldn't let them down. But how far would he have to go to protect it all? The night before the confrontation, he stayed up late, reviewing every scrap of information, every lead he had gathered. His mind raced with plans, but each one felt like a gamble. There was no certainty. Only the unknown. He didn't know who would show up, what they would do, or how far they were willing to go. But he knew one thing for sure: tomorrow, everything would change. It would either be the end of his story or the beginning of a fight for his life. The clock was ticking, and time was running out. The night stretched on, the hours slipping by as the business owner tried to steady his nerves. He hadn't expected the stakes to rise this quickly, but now, with everything on the line, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was being pulled deeper into a web he didn't fully understand. He couldn't stop pacing the floor of his office, his mind racing through every possible scenario. Tomorrow, he would confront them. Whoever they were. But with each passing minute, he wondered more and more if he was truly ready for what was coming. Around midnight, a sudden knock on the door broke the silence. His heart skipped a beat. Who could it be at this hour? His thoughts went immediately to the employees' warning, the threats they had been dealing with, the strange figures lurking around the store. He hesitated, his breath caught in his chest, before he slowly walked to the door, heart pounding. Opening it, he was met with an unexpected sight, a familiar face. It was someone from the community, someone he'd known for years, an older gentleman who had been one of his most loyal customers. His presence here, at this hour, made no sense. "Can I come in?" the man asked, his voice low but urgent. The business owner stepped aside, still caught off guard by the sudden visit. He had seen this man in his store countless times, had even shared casual conversations about the ups and downs of business, life, and the changes in the neighborhood. What was he doing here now, at this hour, when tensions were running so high? As soon as the man stepped into the office, the business owner closed the door behind him, unsure of what to expect. His instincts screamed that something was wrong, but he couldn't place it. "I know what's been going on," the older man said, his voice hoarse, his hands trembling. "I can't stand by any longer. I need to tell you something. You're in more danger than you realize." The business owner's pulse quickened. He'd suspected that there were others involved, but this? This was a twist he hadn't anticipated. He motioned for the man to sit, his mind racing to understand what this revelation meant. The people behind this, the ones harassing you, they're not just some random group. They've been operating here for years, long before you opened your store, the man continued, his words now coming faster, as if he couldn't keep them in any longer. They've been controlling everything behind the scenes, making sure businesses like yours don't thrive, because they want to keep things their way. You've become a target because you're one of the few who didn't fall in line. The business owner was silent, digesting the words, trying to make sense of the truth being laid out before him. Was this some kind of conspiracy? Had he been unknowingly battling against a powerful group this entire time? They'd been watching you. They'd been watching everyone, the man said, lowering his voice. But it's not just about money or power. This goes deeper than that. They control this entire town. And if you don't do what they want, they'll destroy everything. They'll destroy you. The business owner felt a chill run down his spine. This wasn't just some business rivalry gone wrong. This was something far darker. But who were these people? How could they have controlled so much without anyone noticing? The man paused, glancing nervously at the door before continuing. I'm not the only one who's been involved. There are others, people you trust, people you'd never suspect. But you need to act fast. The longer you wait, the more you put yourself and everyone around you in danger. The business owner's mind was racing, trying to process the weight of the situation. He had been so focused on the obvious threats, the anonymous messages, the vandalism. But this was different. This was bigger, more organized. And the stakes had just skyrocketed. You have to understand, the man continued, voice cracking. I never wanted to get mixed up in this. But when they started threatening my family, my business, I had no choice. I had to do what they asked. Just like everyone else. They have eyes everywhere. And now it's your turn. But you can't fight them alone. For a moment, the business owner felt a cold wave of dread wash over him. He had thought he was on the edge of uncovering the truth, that he was finally going to be able to take control. But now, this second twist, this revelation that he had been in the crosshairs of something much larger, something far more dangerous than he could have imagined, was a wake-up call. He hadn't been preparing for the right battle. He had been fighting an invisible enemy all along, one that was already embedded deep within the fabric of the community. Who are they? He asked, barely able to force the words past his lips. His mind was scrambling for any clue that might help him understand the true scope of this conspiracy. But the man didn't answer. Instead, his eyes darted nervously toward the window, as if expecting someone to appear at any moment. They're coming for you. You need to leave now, before it's too late. But it was too late for that. The business owner had already made up his mind. He wasn't running. Not now, not when he was so close to the truth. This wasn't just about saving his store. This was about something far bigger, about exposing the darkness that had been lurking behind the scenes for years. Before he could speak again, the man rushed toward the door, his face pale with fear. I can't stay. They're watching, I have to go. Just remember, trust no one. The door slammed shut behind him before the business owner could stop him. He stood there, frozen, his mind reeling. The man's words echoed in his ears, and for a moment, it felt as though the walls were closing in around him. Who could he trust now? Was there anyone left who wasn't involved in this twisted game? And more importantly, how far did this conspiracy reach? The mystery had deepened, and now he was standing at the precipice of something he couldn't walk away from. But the price of knowing the truth might be higher than he was prepared to pay. He turned to the window, staring out into the night. The shadows outside seemed to shift, as if they were waiting for him to make his next move. He could feel their presence, as if something was closing in, something much darker than just the threats he had faced so far. He had no choice now. The time for hesitation was over. He was in this fight, whether he was ready or not. And the battle was about to escalate in ways he never could have predicted. The business owner stood still for what felt like an eternity, staring out into the dark street. The shadows outside seemed to pulse with an energy of their own. It was as though every step he had taken so far, every bit of preparation, had been leading him to this very moment. He was in too deep now. There was no turning back. He had to know who was behind this, and more than that, he had to make them pay for the destruction they had caused. He couldn't afford to be afraid anymore. The adrenaline in his veins was a cold fire, fueling his resolve. He couldn't just sit back and let them win. They had taken everything from him: his peace, his business, his sense of security, and now they were coming for his life. He had no choice but to face them head on. He grabbed his coat and stepped into the night, his mind focused on one thing: survival. Every step he took felt heavier than the last, the weight of his decisions bearing down on him. As he made his way toward the heart of the conspiracy, the streets felt emptier, quieter, as if the whole town had been swallowed by the shadows. He wasn't sure where to start, who to trust. But he had one lead, one final chance. He reached the old warehouse at the edge of town, a place that had been rumored to be the hub of the secret organization. His heart thudded in his chest as he approached, every muscle tense, ready for whatever lay ahead. He had to act quickly. He had to find answers before it was too late. As he stepped inside, the air was thick with the scent of dust and decay. The warehouse was eerily quiet, the only sound the echo of his footsteps on the cold concrete floor. He moved cautiously, every sense on high alert. He knew he wasn't alone. The shadows here felt alive, watching him, waiting. Then he heard a voice. "Thought you could take us down?" The voice was low, mocking. A man stepped out from behind a stack of crates, his face partially obscured by a mask. The business owner froze, his pulse spiking. The figure in front of him was one of them. The ones who had been terrorizing him, his store, his employees. But now that he was face to face with one of them, the questions were piling up. Why had they targeted him? What was their ultimate goal? "You're too late," the figure said, a cruel smile spreading across his face. "This has been in motion for years. You should have known better than to fight back." The business owner's anger flared. "I'm not leaving until I get answers." "Why me? Why my store?" The figure chuckled darkly. "You've got no idea what you're up against. We've been watching you, making sure you played by our rules. But you? You were always different. You didn't bow down. You fought. And that's why we're here." Before the business owner could respond, a voice rang out from the shadows. "Enough." A second figure emerged, this one more familiar. It was the older man, the one who had warned him earlier. The business owner's heart dropped. How could he be involved in all of this? "You," the business owner breathed, struggling to understand what was happening. "You've been a part of this the whole time?" The older man didn't flinch. "I didn't have a choice. None of us did. We've all been playing a part in this game, some of us unwillingly, others for power, for control. But you came in and messed everything up." The business owner's mind was spinning. It was all a game. A game of power, control, and manipulation. The whole town had been part of a bigger plan. And he was the pawn they'd never counted on, someone who had the audacity to fight back. The figure who had first spoken stepped closer, a menacing gleam in his eyes. "You don't understand. This town, this business world? It's all ours. You should have stayed in line, like everyone else." But now you've made it personal. The business owner's hand instinctively went to the hidden weapon in his jacket, something he had reluctantly carried for months now, knowing that he couldn't trust anyone. The time for words was over. It was time to end this. But just as he was about to make his move, the building's lights flickered and then went out entirely, plunging them all into darkness. A loud crash echoed through the space, followed by hurried footsteps. The business owner's heart raced as he fumbled for his phone, trying to turn on the flashlight. Then, just as suddenly, the lights flashed back on. But the older man was gone. The figure in front of him was now holding something in his hands, a small device. The business owner's heart sank. "What is that?" "You've been so focused on the wrong things," the figure said, his voice filled with venom. "You think you're the hero of your story, but you're just another piece in our game. You've been chasing shadows, but the truth is, you were never supposed to win." Before the business owner could react, the figure pressed the button on the device. A soft whirring sound filled the air, followed by a sharp, echoing boom that rattled the warehouse. The floor shook beneath their feet. The walls groaned. Everything was crumbling. But in the chaos, something unexpected happened. The business owner felt a sharp pain in his chest, then another, deeper and more intense. He stumbled back, confused, as the world around him spun. The device. It wasn't just a weapon. It was something else, something far worse. The last thing he saw before everything went black was the face of the older man, watching from the shadows with a cold, emotionless stare. And in that moment, the business owner realized the truth too late. He had been played. The entire town, his business, his fight, everything had been a carefully orchestrated scheme. And now, as the walls closed in around him, he understood. It had never been about him winning. It had always been about him losing. And the final twist was this: there was no escape. The screen went dark, and the story ended, leaving the audience to wonder what happens when the fight isn't just about survival, but about the forces pulling the strings from behind the scenes. The silence in the warehouse was deafening after everything had fallen apart. The business owner, now lying motionless on the cold, cracked floor, could feel his consciousness slipping away. His mind raced, but it was a blur of confusion and pain. The device, the explosion, the sudden pain, it had all happened so fast, and now everything felt surreal, like he was caught in a nightmare he couldn't wake from. As he struggled to focus, the world around him seemed to dim. He could hear faint footsteps approaching. Someone was coming toward him, their shadow looming over his weakened form. Was it the older man? Was it one of the others? His thoughts were scattered, each breath feeling heavier than the last. Then, through the haze of his thoughts, he heard a voice. It was soft at first, like a whisper in the wind, but it grew louder, clearer. "Stay with me," it said. "Don't let go." The voice was familiar. He strained to lift his head, but his vision was blurred, his body too weak to move. Slowly, the face of the older man appeared in his line of sight, his eyes filled with something the business owner hadn't expected: regret. I didn't want this," the older man said, kneeling down beside him. "You have to believe me. I thought I was doing what I had to, but I was wrong. This wasn't supposed to happen." The business owner tried to speak, but his mouth was dry, his tongue heavy. All he could manage was a weak groan. "I know you're confused," the older man continued, his voice filled with anguish. "But the truth is, I was never supposed to get involved in this. They came for me first. They threatened my family, my life. I had no choice but to comply. And then they found you. They saw your strength, your determination, and they made you their target. They wanted to break you, to control you, but I never wanted it to go this far." The business owner's mind was spinning. He had always suspected that there was more to the story than what he had seen on the surface. But this? This was a revelation that shattered everything he thought he knew. The older man wasn't an enemy, not really, he was a victim, just like him. He had been forced into a situation that he had no control over. "I never wanted to hurt you," the older man whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "But now it's too late. They've done something to you. The device, it wasn't just a weapon. It's meant to erase you from the inside out. It's already working, and there's nothing I can do to stop it." The business owner's heart sank. He couldn't believe it. After everything he had fought for, after everything he had sacrificed, the end was going to come not from an enemy's bullet, but from some unseen device, some technology he had never known existed. The older man's eyes were filled with sorrow. "I tried to warn you. I tried to help, but it was too late the moment they decided to make you their pawn. You were never meant to win this. You were always just a part of their plan." The business owner felt a cold wave wash over him. Was this how it was all going to end? Was his fight for justice, his battle to protect everything he had built, all for nothing? The questions echoed in his mind as he struggled to stay conscious. But then, something shifted. The pain, the darkness, it all seemed to recede for a moment, and in that instant, he realized something. He wasn't done yet. Not completely. He reached out, his hand trembling, his vision still fading, but his resolve clearer than ever. "There's still time," he managed to whisper. "There's always a way out. You can help me stop them." The older man hesitated, his eyes flickering with uncertainty. "You don't understand. It's not just about stopping them. They've infiltrated everything. They control everything. You can't fight them alone. No one can." The business owner, however, was not ready to give up. "I don't care how deep they've infiltrated. I've come too far to quit now. If they think they can break me, they're wrong." His words were shaky, but they were enough to reignite something in the older man's eyes, a glimmer of hope, perhaps, or a spark of guilt that had been buried for too long. "There's still a chance," the older man said, his voice barely audible. "But it's not about fighting them head on. You need to find the people who can expose them. There are others who know the truth, who have been hiding in the shadows, just like me. You need to find them. Together you might have a chance." The business owner nodded slowly, his mind racing with the possibilities. He had been fighting the wrong battle all along. The key to ending this wasn't taking on the organization directly, it was about uncovering the truth, about exposing the corruption that had been allowed to fester for so long. But as he struggled to rise, the older man grabbed his arm, his grip firm. "Don't. You don't have much time. You're already fading. If you don't get help, if you don't act quickly, it'll be too late." "I'll figure it out," the business owner said, though his voice was growing weaker. "I won't let them win." The older man stepped back, and for the first time, there was something like acceptance in his eyes. "I hope you do. But know this, you're not alone in this fight, even if it feels like it. There are others out there who have been waiting for someone like you to show up. Don't forget that." With those final words, the older man vanished into the shadows, leaving the business owner alone in the dimly lit warehouse, struggling to keep his eyes open. But in the darkness, something stirred, a flicker of movement, a presence just beyond the edge of his vision. Someone else was watching. The business owner's mind reeled, but he knew one thing for sure: the fight wasn't over. It was just beginning. And even though the road ahead was uncertain, filled with danger and unanswered questions, he had something now that he hadn't had before: knowledge. Knowledge that the battle was far bigger than just his store, than just his own survival. It was a fight for the future, for everything that had been taken and everything that could still be saved. As he made his way toward the exit, his steps slower now but resolute, he knew that the truth was out there. And no matter how long it took, he would find it. He would expose the organization and make them pay for the suffering they had caused. But what he didn't know was that the real enemy was closer than he thought. And the final twist was this: the older man had never been on his side. The entire thing, the warnings, the help, it had all been a carefully orchestrated plan to lead him right into the trap. The story was never about survival. It was always about control. And the business owner had just walked straight into the hands of the very people he'd been trying to escape. But by the time he realized it, it was already too late.